All right, it's time for session 0. How's it going, everybody? My name's Joe. Welcome to Tabletop Theory, where we talk about things like counseling theory, educational theory, and how putting those things together can help you become a better game master, storyteller, player, all the different things that go into the RPG hobby. Today is part 2 of the world building your own campaign sort of playlist idea that I came up with a while back. It's time for session 2, where we talk about session 0. So let's get started. So what comes first? Usually, unless I'm plunking players down into a pre-established world, I really don't do a lot of planning. This comes down to a pretty simple equation in my mind. Am I preparing the players for the world, or am I preparing the world for the players? I generally lean pretty far towards the latter because that means that the players get to do all the heavy lifting, and I'm also a world-class procrastinator. I usually wait to create any kind of narrative until I know who the characters are going to be in the story that we're going to be telling. This can create a little bit of extra work for me because it does mean that I'm not really going to have anything prepared until the players have created their characters, but I usually find that it plays off well in the long run because the characters that are actually created by the players before I've written anything get a chance to be way more involved in the world that gets created after they've been created. I talked about this in the last video, so if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go watch part 1. I'll wait. No, I'm just kidding, I'm gonna keep going. Now that we have a rough outline of where our game is gonna be taking place and an extremely rough outline of exactly where our players are gonna be starting play, we can get down to the most important part, creating the cast. Whether this is the first time you're playing with these players, or it might be the 10th time you're playing with them, it never hurts to get to know your players. Understand the types of things that they come to expect from the game that you're gonna be playing. I talked a little bit about this before, but it bears repeating. If they know what kind of game that they're signing up for, then it helps you to create the type of game that they want to play. If they all want to play a mystery and you want to write a mystery, then great, that works well for everybody. If you want to write a big swashbuckling sea adventure, but they all want to play some kind of romance that exists on a farm, then maybe you have to make a compromise. But the point is, if you know who your players are, then you're gonna get a better idea of the types of characters that they enjoy playing. When casting directors are casting a film, they're looking for people that are going to fit the vision of the director or the writer. It's pretty similar when it comes time to actually create characters for a campaign, because for the most part, it doesn't make sense to create a campaign for characters that really have no business playing in it. Ask the questions. What do they want to play? Do they have any ideas? Have they had some characters stored away for years that they've never gotten a chance to trot out? Most players have, and maybe this is an opportunity for them to bust them out. The thing about not creating any kind of pre-written world or social information or norms or anything like that is that it really gives your players a blank canvas to create something kind of interesting on. For example, if a player really insists on knowing something about the world that they're going to be playing in, and they keep asking a specific question, what's the socioeconomic implication of playing a rich person in this game? What are magic users treated like in this game? Generally speaking, I just make something up. It's not a bad thing to do that, because once you've made it up for a completely blank world, then guess what? That's the rule. And you can have it as a steadfast pillar for your society from that point forward. But if you've thought about it in advance and you've created something that you tell your players, then your players have to work around the rules that you've already created, as opposed to helping you create the worlds on the fly. So whenever I'm creating something new, I really like to lean on what the players are thinking about for their characters to help develop the progress of the world from a narrative perspective, from a social perspective, from an economic perspective. I know that a lot of people aren't comfortable improvising like that, but what I've found over the years is that if you just spout something off and you do it with enough confidence, then your players are going to listen to you and they're going to believe you. And that's not a bad thing, because most of the time they just want some kind of answer that they can start to wrap their head around. But if they have input and if they have ideas and you're receptive to those ideas, then that world starts to take on a bunch of different interesting flavors that are really diverse and really varied and start to reflect what could be considered a more naturally developed world that is influenced by a lot of different types of thought. And if they do keep pressuring you to come up with answers for things that you haven't thought of yet, it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know yet, and move on until you actually do have an answer for them. No matter what, wait for them to develop a backstory, no matter how long or brief it is, and review it before moving on to the next step. Most of the time, when I start a new campaign, I have 3 types of players when it comes to backstory. I have player 1, who writes a minimal backstory that might be 1 sentence or 2. I have player 2 that writes a multi-page PDF that is a shared Google Doc that has multiple references to all kinds of social norms for a society that their character might be a part of or might have some kind of conflict with. And then there's player 3, which usually falls somewhere in between player 1 and player 2 because they just have some ideas but they don't want to put them all down on paper. All 3 of those types of players are fine because all 3 of those types of players actually have really great ideas most of the time, and you can use all the information that they give you. As an example, if you have a lot of players that have chosen to play magic users, then guess what? You probably need to come up with some kind of magic college where they have the opportunity to learn how to use magic, whether wizards or sorcerers or warlocks. Remember, we're all talking about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in this series. If you have a bunch of players that are playing more martial characters like monks or barbarians, fighters or paladins, then you probably need to come up with some kind of training ground, maybe pit fighting area. Maybe they're all soldiers in different wars. All of those different areas require a little bit of backstory to start to figure out where things come from. Even if the players decide that they don't really want to write a whole bunch of backstory, but they're all playing monks, then you get the opportunity to actually create this really interesting story of a bunch of martial arts schools. Those small decisions made by your players can have dramatic influence on the way your world gets written. So letting your players do the heavy lifting is an important principle for me, because whenever players come up with backstory, it gives me the opportunity to start to pick those ideas apart to develop the world further. And even if they've just thrown something small in there, you can still use it for information to help develop the things that are going to be happening around them. Whenever my players write backstories for me and for their characters, I try to pick them apart for 3 specific things: people, places, and events. If your players provide you with the names of organizations or groups or societies, you can and really should record them and use them in the future, because names are wonderful, especially if your players have already come up with them. You may not have any more information other than the name of a secret society, but guess what? If that secret society makes an appearance in the game and that player recognizes the name as the one that they created, that gets them so much more involved in the way things actually play out. Same thing goes for locations. If your players provide you with the names of oceans, towns, mountains, rivers, if they've created it and you choose to put it into your game, which I wholly recommend, that means that player's going to be able to recognize the work that they put into creating the backstory for their character. Events are also something that should totally be extrapolated for more information. If your players have created a character that fought in a war, then guess what? They've given you a historical event. Wars have massive influences on the world around them and the people that fight in them. The same thing can be said for weddings, thefts, natural disasters. All of those things have huge, long-lasting implications for the characters that might have been involved in them when they actually occurred. No matter how small, the decisions that your players make should always be extrapolated for more information, because they can always be included into the world that you haven't built yet. At least I try to do that. And one wonderful thing that I did want to bring up is that if you have the opportunity to have a character in your game that a player has chosen to give amnesia, take it. That is the ultimate free pass to include them into a massive ring of wonderful exploits, shenanigans, and adventures that they may have been completely unprepared for, because if they have no memory of what their character did before the campaign starts, then you can put anything you want in there, within reason, and get them involved in the campaign in a really significant way. I've done this a few times, and recently I've got a player that's going through something similar, and they have done a wonderful job of really reacting to the types of curveballs that I've thrown at them, because the backstory of their character they never decided to create, and now they are one of the main, huge, important players in the entire atmosphere of the world. They created a paladin with amnesia. Then they discovered that before they had amnesia, they were a violent warlord and servant of an evil god, and they were given amnesia in a way to sort of recover all of the bad that they did. And the god that they are a paladin of is one that wanted to give them an opportunity to make amends for the world that they helped to break. That player didn't really know that that was going to happen when they gave their character amnesia. And over time, and with their consent, we've sort of created a world where when we work together, that character is a really massive part of not just one campaign, but several campaigns. Amnesia's great. Long story short, if you have a player that chooses to use it, you should use it too. So let's do some work and have ourselves a session 0. As a reminder, we are playing in a world called Ondol, where it is a low magic setting and there are magic users, but the gods and goddesses of this world are not passing out divine favor, at least not as frequently as they used to. And for reasons that no one understands yet, magic has been slowly disappearing from the world. The game is set in a town called Rengal, where the primary industry is agriculture and it is next to a river. That's pretty much all the information that I gave to my players, or the people that are helping create characters for this exercise, before I set anything in place. Rengal is a flat area that is good for farming, punctuated by tall pine trees and a bit of a temperate climate. That's about it. This next part I'm gonna have to read off some notes, but the thing is, these characters were created by people on Twitter that follow me. When I put out a call for characters for this exercise, they responded, and I'm happy to hear it. So this first suggestion comes from Olbuddy over on Twitter, and he has created an elf ranger named Heath Nexium of Dresher. Heath is running away from an arranged and short marriage with a feudal lord's human daughter. So even with a short tweet of a description, we now have a couple of pieces of information that we can pick apart from this character that Olbuddy created. So what do we know from this backstory? We know that Heath is from a place called Dresher. Okay, where is Dresher? We don't know, but we do know that it is far away and it has a local lord in it. And we also know that it is a place where humans and elves do marry, to the point where we actually have somebody who's running away from a marriage that they don't want to be a part of. So what does that tell us? It tells us maybe that arranged marriages are common. It tells us that there is a reason for him to run away. It also tells us that people might be hunting for him. It tells us that Heath has a bride that's probably looking for him, or maybe he has a bride's family that's looking for him. These characters can come up later as people that are hunting a character, or these characters can come up later because they have influence in the town of Rengal that we're playing in. Heath's flight from his marriage actually gives him an opportunity and a reason to show up in Rengal. Because he's on the run, now we know why he's in Rengal. He's trying to get out of Dodge. He's trying to avoid a marriage. If Heath is running away from that marriage, it gives us a potential plot hook, and it gives us a couple of questions we get to ask. Why is he running away? Is he running away from her because he doesn't love her? Is he running away from her because he loves somebody else? Are this woman's parents hunting Heath? All of these questions can be answered by talking to your players, but the thing is, as you get through all of this information, you get more and more pieces of the puzzle for creating your world. The second character is one from the Don't Forget Your Towel podcast, and this is what they provided to us. A dwarf who was raised by a family of eccentric Eladrin, now forced into a quest with a party of only dwarves to save his ailing family. This particular dwarf is named Surian of the Calith family, but he goes by the name Rocky Mineral Stone in the party because that's what he thinks dwarf names sound like. Wow, okay. All right, so what does this tell us? This tells us that dwarves are in this world and that Eladrin are also in this world. It bears saying that when I asked these people to create these characters for this world, I gave them the specificity that they needed to create characters that only came from the player's handbook. Now, admittedly, Eladrin probably aren't in the 5th edition player's handbook. I honestly have no idea, but the point is they're in this player's backstory. So now we know that there is some kind of link to this particular race of creature. Now, Eladrin are basically elves that have spent more time in the Feywilds than a lot of other races, but you get the idea. So now that we know that Eladrin are there, and we know that they've adopted this particular dwarf, what does that tell us? It tells us that these Eladrin might have done something to gain the ire of the other people in their society, or it could be that adoption of wayward children of other races is something that's encouraged. It could be that this is a beneficial relationship. It could be that Surian's parents are ashamed of what they've done. It could be that they try to hide him, or it could be completely normal. This is a really fun idea. For those of you that don't know, Eladrin are basically elves that have spent way too much time in the Feywild. If you don't know what the Feywild is, that's fine. If you've watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, just remember when Aang goes into the spirit world, yeah, Feywild, pretty much that. The character of Yusran also gives us some really interesting cultural ideas. Eladrin raising a dwarf is just kind of a fun image if you consider dainty magical elves trying to raise a bouncing bearded baby of a dwarf that's probably just smashing things. That's a fun image and I really like it, and I think that if I was going to GM this game, I would absolutely utilize that as a backstory. That's a ton of fun. Just a baby dwarf smashing things is just a fun image. But it also brings up the idea that the folks over at Don't Forget Your Towel said that this is an eccentric family of Eladrin. So why? Why are they eccentric? Are they eccentric because they've adopted a dwarven child, or are they eccentric for other reasons? Is adoption of dwarves something that's pretty normal in their culture, or are they considered eccentric because no one's ever done this before? Maybe it's just considered weird because of basic bigotry. Maybe Eladrin are jerks and they don't think that that type of thing should happen. They don't think that dwarves should be raised by Eladrin. Maybe that creates a social norm that you can use later in the campaign if Yusran ever goes back to see his family. Either way, it's a conversation you get to have with your players. This character idea also dictates that he's currently adventuring with a party of dwarves to save his family. So that tells us that something's gone wrong with his Eladrin family. Does that mean that these other dwarves were also raised by Eladrin? Or does this mean that he has somehow found a way to infiltrate a party of regular dwarves? Remember, he has an assumed name of Rocky Mineral Stone. Fabulous. But the point is, his family is ailing. Why are they ailing? We don't know. And these dwarves are working with him to try to help his family. So even if raising dwarven children is somehow frowned upon and seen as eccentric in Eladrin society, maybe these dwarves on the world of Ondol actually have good relations with Eladrin. Maybe they really want to be helpful to them. Maybe this type of pilgrimage to help Eladrin or work to help Eladrin is part of a social norm that currently exists for dwarven society. Because saving Yusran's family is actually a great opportunity for a plot hook. It's already baked into the character description, and I didn't have to write that at all. They put it right in there for me. Yusran also calls himself Rocky because he feels like that's what dwarves need to be called. So where did he come up with that idea? Was he taught about his culture by his adopted family? Did he learn about his dwarven culture by going out and meeting other dwarves? Is this information correct? Is it incorrect? All of these questions, again, can be answered by having conversations with the player. All of these things are baked into the character description, and you can try to figure out why Yusran and Heath are both coming into Rengal in order to begin the campaign. Since we already have Heath in Rengal trying to flee from a marriage he didn't want to be a part of, we can try to figure out a reason for everybody to work together. Maybe Heath wants to join Yusran in order to help his family, but also to get further away from the marriage he's trying to avoid. Maybe the dwarves that were traveling with Yusran got kidnapped, or maybe they ditched him. Maybe they got kind of tired of dealing with a dwarf that didn't understand the same cultural norms that they did. Either way, you have a reason for both of them to work together in that village, because now that they're there, and now that you know what their backgrounds are, now you can start to build the campaign. Even with those two brief character descriptions from Twitter, we've now created social norms for Eladrin, some interesting ideas for backstories for Heath, some potentially interesting ways to involve different intermarriages between elves and humans. We have potential lords that exist in a city far away. We have an entire race of fantasy creatures that probably don't exist in the same realm as the campaign that's going to be taking place in. All of those different things can now be utilized in a way that you're going to build the campaign that you want to create. And remember, I didn't really create any of that. That's all done by the players. Old Buddy and the folks from Don't Forget Your Towel made up all that stuff for me. Because next episode, we're going to use the information that they gave us to start to write the campaign that these characters would be playing in. So that's all I've got. Letting your players do the heavy lifting of writing a campaign for you is actually a really easy thing to do, and it's something I've been doing for a long time, and it really gives you the opportunity to hear what your players have to say and include it in the creation of the story. If you have any ideas or some things that I might have missed, you can leave it down here in the comments section, or you can follow me over on Instagram or Twitter at Tabletop Theory 1, and you can leave the information there. This episode is also going to be available for podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. If you liked the video, you can actually hit the subscribe button or hit the like button, or if you really, really liked the video, you can become a supporting member over on Buy Me a Coffee. The link is down in the description for $5 a month. For those of you that have already done that, I am very grateful for your continued support, and if you'd like to become a supporting member anytime soon, I sure would appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one. So I wanted to share with you an idea that I learned about when I was first learning about children in small group therapy called feeling cards. Now, feeling cards are index cards that have emotions written on them, them that sometimes if a child wants to express how they're feeling in a small group therapy session, what they'll do is they'll hold up this card to let the other members of the group know how they're feeling. Now, there's a lot more to it that I'm not going to get into, but I do feel like this idea could be really helpful to players at your table that might not be comfortable engaging in that sort of full tilt role playing that a lot of other players might be involved in, but they still want to let everybody else at the table know how their character is feeling. Using these feeling cards by holding them up so that other people at the table can see how their character is feeling or reacting to a situation that might be occurring in front of them is something that really gives everybody else at the table the opportunity to react in kind to how different characters are feeling. I would recommend that if you do break these out, you do give the other players an opportunity to pick them up and get involved with it, because if somebody feels uncomfortable about what else is going on at the table, you can use these to respond as a player, and as a game master, you have a better idea of how those players are feeling in any given situation. So I encourage you to give it a shot if you feel like it would be useful at your table. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, be kind, and have fun adventuring.